So, you have made your move by doing K-ply search, the opponent has made a move, it is your turn to move again. What do? You call the K-ply search again. So, look further into the tree and then make your move, and then the opponent will make the move, and then you again call K-ply search. So, for every move that you have to make, you are doing K-ply search. And why are we doing this repeatedly? Because we cannot analyze the game perfectly enough. Our evaluation functions are never going to be perfect, just like our heuristic functions earlier. So, what are these evaluation functions essentially? It is a static function like the heuristic function that we had seen, that looks at a board position and returns a value in some range. So, typically it will be minus large to plus large, which we will scale it down to minus 1 to plus 1 essentially. So, what we are doing now is that we had 3 labels which were the outcome of the game, a loss or a draw or a win for max, minus 1 or 0 or plus 1. We have converted this set of 3 outcomes into a continuous interval which ranges from minus 1 to plus 1 essentially. So, and if your board position is good, we will give it some positive value, if it is bad, we will give it some negative value. So, it may not necessarily be win or loss, it could be somewhere in between. So, plus 1 will still be a win for max and minus 1 for min, but intermediate values would be either good or bad for min, and this is where the evaluation function will play a role essentially. So, positive values will be good for max and negative values will be good for min. So, typically in most games, the evaluation function has 2 components. One is measures the material strength, how many pieces do I have, how many pieces does my opponent have essentially. So, that is called as material strength, and the other is positional strength, are my pieces in a good position. So, there are ways of measuring that. So, let us look at that for chess for a moment, or let us say we look at tic-tac-toe, which is this cross and knots game, and we are doing let us say 2-ply look ahead. So, our k is equal to 2, we generate the first branch with all the possibilities. So, notice that we have not listed all 8 moves for min, we have only listed 5 because the others are symmetrical in nature. So, for example, if you look at the first board position, min has made a knot just below the cross, but it could have made a knot at this place, and symmetry says that they are equivalent in some sense. So, we have ignored the symmetric positions and simply drawn these 5 board positions. Then we have to think of an evaluation function. So, what could be a good evaluation function? The evaluation function that we can think of for tic-tac-toe or cross and knots is count how many rows or columns or diagonals are open to each player. So, remember that in tic-tac-toe you win a game if you have played 3 of your kind, 3 crosses, let us say, either in some row or in some column or in some diagonal. So, how many are available to you? So, if you look at the last of these board positions, you can see that if we count the number of free rows, columns and diagonals for max and subtract from that the numbers of free rows, columns and diagonals for min, then this is the count as you will see for this board position which is marked as star. So, for max you can see max has made a move on the top left corner, min has made a move in the center square. So, max cannot exploit any diagonals. So, max still has 2 vertical rows and 2 horizontal rows open to him. So, there are 4 such possibilities of completing 3 in a row for max. For min, because min is occupying the center, you can see that the bottom row and the rightmost, the 2 bottom rows and the 2 rightmost columns are available to min, that is 4, plus 1 diagonal is also available to min, so which is 5. So, then we get this value of 4 minus 5 is equal to minus 1. So, like this we do for each of these positions and we back up the value for min this thing. It turns out that these values are 1, 0, 1, 0 and minus 1, and because it is min, min will back up this value and say that the value of this node is. So, the evaluation function where n is any node, okay, it is given in this call out this thing. So, you count the number of free rows, free columns and free diagonals for max. How many are there? If you see the figure with the red lines on the top, then max can complete the first column. So, if you know the rules of the game uh, that if max could have finished this somehow, let us say min played foolishly and min played this. So, max has won the game. So, by the time they have made one move each, which means max has a. So, we are looking at this starred board position. Max has played a move in the corner and min has played a move in the center. So, at this point, if you look at what is the moves available for max or what are the ways of possible winning the game is available for max, max can do this column, max can finish this column because it is empty right now. Max can do this row and max can do this row essentially, which is what is shown on the figure on the top essentially. Likewise, if you do for min, you can see that min can finish this row, min can finish this row because these are available, this vertical row and this diagonal also. So, min has one extra possibilities. So, that which is why you have 4 minus 5 is minus 1, and if you compute them for the other 4 children of min, you will see that their values are 1, 0, 1 and 0. So, min will obviously choose the one with the lowest value essentially, and that is how we are illustrated the use of an evaluation function essentially. We do not know the outcome, but we are trying to say okay, there are more openings for min in this particular position. So, it looks like it is minus 1. The actual value of the game is 0 if you know tic-tac-toe. So, here is a simple evaluation function for chess which is attributed to Claude Shannon, and the letters here which are K, Q, R, B. So, K stands for king, Q stands for queen, R stands for rook, B stands for bishop, N stands for knight, and P stands for pawn essentially. Plus there are certain positional things that we will see. So, what Shannon suggested is that these letters K, Q, R, B, N, they stand for the number of king, queen, rook, bishop, knight and pawn, and in the evaluation function you see the difference. So, for example, this row it says how many queens do I have and how many queens the opponent has, you take the difference and multiply it by 9. So, Shannon has said that queen has a weightage of 9 essentially. If I have a queen and you do not have a queen, then I will add 9 to my evaluation function because you can have only one queens, but rooks you can have 2. So, you can have 2 rooks and the opponent can have 0 rooks. If that is the case, then you will get 5 into 2 is equal to 10 points for counting the rooks. So, this is the material part, count do I have a queen and you do not have a queen and so on and so forth. On the other hand, if you did not have a queen and the opponent had a queen, then it will be minus 9. So, it will reduce the value of the evaluation function. So, if opponent has more pieces, then your evaluation function would be negative, which is good for min and bad for max. So, these are the weightages. So, Shannon says the queen has a weightage of 9, the rook has a weightage of 5, bishops and knights have weight of 3 and pawns have this thing. The king has a very large weight of 200 because we know that if you do not have the king, you have lost the game essentially. So, that is actually, I mean, it does not change things very much because both, as long as the game is going on, both kings will be on board. Then there are some mobility issues. So, D stands for double pawns, for example. If you have double pawns, then it is not good for you. That is why we have a subtracting this from there. Or if you have blocked pieces or if you have isolated pawns. So, if you know the rules of the chess, then you know one pawn can support another pawn if they are on a diagonal essentially. So, but if they are not supporting, then they are isolated essentially. So, some pieces like this you can use, and M is the mobility. So, the number of legal moves that each player has essentially. So, if your pieces are blocked, then you will have less moves, and if your pieces are free, then you will have more moves essentially. So, if you have played chess, you would know that there are things like control of the center, which also counts as a positional move. So, other features are like how safe is your king, how much of the center you control. By control, you mean that either you are occupying the central part of the chessboard, or your pieces are attacking those squares essentially. Then pawn structure, double rooks and so on. So, chess players think that two rooks in the same column is a very powerful thing to have, because they support each other. So, that is how an evaluation function is built, and the evaluation function for the Deep Blue program, which beat Kasparov, had 8,000 such components essentially. So, we have just listed a few here, we have counted pieces and we have said a few things here, but the evaluation function had 8,000 components. Where does the evaluation function come from? Traditionally, it has been given to us by human chess experts essentially, but more recently programs have figured out how to learn evaluation functions through machine learning, in particular through reinforcement learning, and in particular through deep reinforcement learning. We will mention that in a moment. So, positional features in chess, they are concerned with mobility, board control, development, how many pieces are mobile, pawn formations, piece combinations, like for example double rooks, and whether the king is protected, etc. So, two rooks in the same column have added value. This any chess player will tell you. Double rooks, as they are called. A pair of bishops is better than a bishop and a knight essentially, because they can act in concert. Knights are valuable in certain kinds of end positions. So, you should be able to recognize that. Pieces must become more mobile and either occupy the center or control it, that we have already said. Chained pawns that support each other are better than isolated pawns, and pawns in the same column or opposing pawns head to head are not good. Pawns heading for promotion have added value. So, if you know the rules of the game, if the pawn reaches the last row on the opponent side, then you can promote it to any piece that you want. The king needs protection in the opening and the middle games, because that is why they do things like castling and so on, so that you surround the king by other pieces and it cannot be attacked. But as the game proceeds, in the end the king can become an offensive piece essentially. So, its nature changes, it has become more active. Then there are things like pins and forks and discover attacks, which you can capture using positional values. Now, coming back to this game of AlphaGo essentially, that also obviously uses an evaluation function, and AlphaGo uses a combination of search and policy learning, as they called it. The AlphaGo program learned the evaluation function from past games that were played by human experts essentially. But in 2017, this company DeepMind introduced a program called AlphaGo 0, to which they only gave the rules of the game as input. They did not give anything like that we talked about chess, that king has so much value and things like that, or this positional value, nothing. They just gave rules of the game to the program, and the program played millions of games against itself, and using this process called reinforcement learning, it learned the evaluation function essentially. So, using deep reinforcement learning. So, what do you mean by learn the evaluation function? As for example, in chess, what is the weight of the king, what is the weight of controlling the center? These are parameters that you can tune and learn essentially, and this is what AlphaGo 0 could do by itself. So much so that it beat its predecessor AlphaGo comprehensively, I think 100 games to 0 or something like that. So, evaluation versus look ahead, essentially that is the thing that we need to discuss. If you have an evaluation function, then why do we need to look ahead at all? Why not just do one ply search, just see what are the moves, evaluate those moves and make the best move essentially. Now, one of these uh, scientists called Digroot, he showed that grandmasters do store tens of thousands of chess schemata, that they can recognize certain patterns to be good or bad, which is why very often grandmasters can look at a board position and without doing look ahead, they know that this is good and this is not good essentially. But it is difficult to devise an evaluation function that is good enough to play with one ply look ahead, and that's come out through experimentation. That's why we have a combination of evaluation and look ahead. We don't apply the evaluation function at one ply, we apply it at k ply depending on how much computational resources we have and how much we can look ahead essentially. So, it has been estimated, for example, Patrick Winston said long time ago that if you can do 15 ply search, then even a reasonably good evaluation function will allow your program to play at grandmaster level. There are certain things that you can try and capture in the evaluation function. So, for example, this position shown on the right, people who know chess will understand that this is a good position for black essentially, which could have been discovered if you had done a little bit of look ahead. So, this particular position is called the fork. So, it is a pattern in which the black knight is simultaneously attacking the white pieces. So, as you know, the knight moves in this fashion. So, it could go and capture either of these two pieces, and white can only save one of those two pieces. Now, the black knight might get sacrificed in the process, but the value of the knight is much less than the value of a rook or the value of a queen. So, this is considered good for black essentially. So, losing a knight in exchange for one of them would result in material advantage for black essentially. White can only move one of the two pieces away. So, this must give a positive value for black, which means negative value for white essentially. It could have been discovered by further look ahead, but if you can recognize the pattern, then you do not have to do that extra look ahead essentially. Remember that the evaluation function is applied only on the horizon. After doing k-ply search, then whatever the leaf node is that, for each of those leaf nodes you apply the evaluation function. Now, there are such situations which chess players have recognized, which are kind of dependent upon the fact that who has to move, and one of them is called Zugzwang, which is a German word for compulsion to move. It is a situation found in chess and in other games as well, wherein one player is put to a disadvantage because they must make a move essentially. So, in this situation, for example, when any possible move will be worsen their position. So, this is a very simple position, two white pawns, one black pawn and one king each essentially. In the position shown here, if white is to move, then black is safe. What can white move? White can either move this pawn forward, or it can move king to either this position or this position or this position or this position. But if black is to move, then the black pawn and subsequently the game will be lost. Why is that? If black is to move, black cannot move that black pawn. So, it will have to move back the king to one of these positions. And then white will push the thing forward and eventually capture the black pawn and promote the other pawn, and it would win essentially. So, some evaluation functions include this fact to count as to who has to move, and the position depends upon who has to move essentially. This is another position for Zugzwang, which is also called Zugzwang for black, and if white is to move, black is safe because white cannot attack any black pawn essentially. So, what can white move? If white moves this thing forward, then black will capture that essentially. The only other things white can do is to either move the king here or move the king here essentially. That is the only possibilities. So, as I just said, if white moves the pawn, then the black will capture it this thing. But if black is to move, then black is forced to withdraw support for one of the two pawns essentially. So, if for example, the black moves the king here, this king will come here and capture that black pawn essentially. So, it is a position which is again a Zugzwang kind of a position. So, some people have observed that doing a finite amount of look ahead has some drawbacks, and this is a very contrived kind of a position. As you can see here, you can see that both the players have 8 pawns left and all the pawns are head to head to each other, in the sense that all of them are in a deadlock position. So, this black cannot move here and this white cannot move here, and that is true for all the pawns essentially. So, it is a kind of a deadlock position, and so white has a kind of a wall which is protecting it. If you look at the pieces here, black has a bishop, but it is on the white square. So, it cannot attack any of these white pawns which are all on black squares. So, which means that there is no way black, even though black has a material advantage, black has got a bishop and 2 rooks in addition to what the pawns have. Black cannot do anything because it cannot breach the wall that white has constructed. So, this position is known as the poisoned rook essentially. So, what happens, you place your rook here and it is a temptation for white to go and capture this rook essentially. But what happens if you do that, and this was given to this program called deep thought, this position was given to that, and which could look ahead 10 or 11 ply, but what deep thought did was to it capture the white rook with the pawn. So, you can see that once that happens, that wall is broken and then the other pieces of black can come into play and white actually went on to lose the game. But a human being looking at this can do a little bit more than look ahead search. So, they realize that this very contrived pawn structure is impregnable, and as long as all white has to do is to just move around in its region, and there is no way black can attack it essentially, and the rules of the game say that the game will end in a draw essentially. So, look ahead can have these kind of problems that they cannot see till the end of the game, and evaluation functions are rarely perfect. So, black's powerful pieces are unable to threaten the white king essentially. So, we have already seen this, that applying the minimax value will determine the minimax value of the game tree in terms of the values which are here. These are the values given to us by the evaluation function. You do a search up to certain K-ply depth, back up the value, and then you know what is the value of that game tree. So, we will come back to this algorithms for doing this search in a moment, and we will see the algorithms that we employ here. So, what are the algorithms we are talking about? That you do K-ply search. So, what we are going to focus on now is how to do that K-ply search. So, we will do that in a moment.